The iron chains rattled as the ship rocked against the black waters of the Bosporus. A pale moon hung above, cold and watching. As a frightened 15-year-old girl whispered prayers in a language no one aboard understood. Her name was Roxolana, but history would remember her by another name, Hurrem Sultan. And on this night, as the winds carried the scent of salt and despair, destiny was sailing with her toward the heart of the Ottoman Empire. The ship creaked as it neared the harbor of Constantinople. The sound of drums echoed from the distant palace walls. Slaves were lined up in silence, their wrists bound, their futures already decided by the Sultan's market of beauty and blood. Roxolana's emerald eyes, too bright, too alive, caught the attention of a man in silk robes. His lips curled into a smile. "Send this one to the palace," he ordered. The girl didn't understand the words, but she felt their weight. She was being chosen not for freedom, but for a life she couldn't yet imagine. The gates of Topkapi Palace rose like a golden prison. Inside the imperial harem was a world of whispered threats and silent wars, a place where every glance could kill and every smile could betray. Women from across the world were trained here to serve the Sultan's desires, to entertain, to obey, to vanish. When Roxolana was brought before the chief mistress, the air thickened with judgment. The mistress looked her over, her sharp eyes scanning the trembling girl. "Too wild," she said. "Break her spirit, or she will break others." But Roxolana did not bow. Even through fear, she met the woman's gaze. Something inside her refused to be broken. Weeks passed. The girl learned Turkish, the gestures of respect, the silence expected of slaves. Yet she also learned how to listen, how to see what others missed. Her laughter, strange in a place ruled by whispers, began to echo through the marble halls. The other girls started calling her Hurrem, meaning the cheerful one, a name that mocked her pain, but one she wore with quiet defiance. When she looked at her reflection in the mirror of polished brass, she no longer saw the frightened Ukrainian girl. She saw a mask, one she could use, one she could control. The day Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent entered the harem, every girl froze. The air trembled. The scent of incense and jasmine filled the room. He was young, tall, and his gaze carried the weight of an empire. As he passed, Hurrem knelt like the others, head bowed, breath still. But when he turned to leave, a spark of boldness overtook her. She lifted her eyes. For a heartbeat, their gazes met. It was a moment forbidden by law, but destiny had already broken its first rule. That night, Suleiman asked for the girl with the green eyes. The harem buzzed with disbelief. Thousands of women, and he had chosen the one who dared to look at him. Hurrem sat by a small window, looking at the moon over the Bosporus, the same moon that had witnessed her captivity. Tomorrow, she would become the first slave in 3 centuries to marry a sultan, something the empire's laws forbade. 5 imperial codes would be broken for her, though she knew none of them yet. The court was silent, afraid. The priests whispered of curses, the viziers warned of chaos. But the sultan had made his decision. He would marry her not as a concubine, but as his legal wife. And Hurrem knew her wedding night would change the empire forever. As the bells of dawn began to echo through the palace, Hurrem closed her eyes. She was no longer the captive girl from Ruthenia. She was becoming a weapon wrapped in silk, one that would cut through centuries of power. Tomorrow, the Ottoman Empire would awaken to a new order, and the first cut would be made by a bride. The palace bells rang not for war, but for something even more dangerous: love. For the first time in 300 years, an Ottoman sultan would wed a slave. Across the empire, whispers turned to outrage. And as the sun set behind the domes of Istanbul, Hurrem Sultan stepped into history dressed not in chains, but in crimson silk. The Grand Vizier, Ibrahim Pasha, stood before the sultan, his face pale with fear. "My lord," he said carefully, "the law of the house forbids this. No sultan may marry his concubine. It endangers the order of succession." Suleiman turned his gaze toward the window, watching the seagulls wheel over the Bosphorus. "The law serves the throne," he replied, "and I am the throne." The words silenced the chamber. It was not just defiance, it was heresy against the traditions that held the empire together. But the sultan no longer saw tradition. He saw Hurrem's eyes green as rebellion, burning through the cage of his crown. The Nekah, the imperial marriage ceremony, took place in secret, inside the gilded hall of petitions. Only a handful of witnesses were allowed: priests, guards, and a trembling scribe whose quill shook as he wrote. Hurrem's gown shimmered like blood under candlelight. Her veil was embroidered with verses from the Quran, stitched in gold by trembling hands. As the imam began the words, the chamber filled with tension. A slave girl dared to sit beside the world's most powerful man as his equal. When Suleiman placed the ring on her finger, the candles flickered violently, as if the palace itself resisted. The court chroniclers would later write that thunder rolled over the city that night, though the sky was clear. And when the vows ended, Hurrem bowed her head, not in submission, but in triumph. The morning after, the empire awoke in shock. From the mosques of Damascus to the markets of Cairo, rumors spread like wildfire. How could the sultan defy Allah's will? Some cried. Others whispered she bewitched him. Inside the palace, the harem seethed with hatred. Old concubines spat curses behind silk fans. Servants crossed themselves as Hurrem passed. She had broken not one, but 5 imperial codes. 1. A slave had become a wife. 2. A concubine had gained legal power. 3. A foreigner had entered the royal bloodline, for the Sultan had ignored his counsel. 5. Love had been placed above law, and for that the empire would make her pay. The night was heavy with incense and silence. Hurrem entered the Sultan's private chamber, her footsteps slow, her heart echoing like a drum of war. The walls glowed with torchlight reflected off golden mirrors. Suleiman stood by the window, dressed not as a ruler, but as a man stripped of armor. When he turned, his eyes softened, the eyes of a poet, not a conqueror. "Are you afraid?" he asked. Hurrem shook her head. "No," she whispered. "Not of you." Her words were the first unchained ones ever spoken to him. They marked the beginning of something the empire could neither understand nor destroy. That night, the Sultan's heart was conquered, and the empire began to unravel from within. At dawn, the palace awoke to screams. One of Hurrem's maids had been found dead, strangled in her sleep. A warning. The Grand Vizier refused to speak, but his silence told Hurrem everything. The empire's enemies would not kill her directly. They would poison her slowly, through fear and loss. Yet as she stood beside Suleiman on the balcony, gazing over the empire's golden spires, she did not flinch. In her eyes burned the calm of someone who had already accepted the cost of power. As the call to prayer echoed through Istanbul, Hurrem whispered softly, "Let them hate me, so long as they cannot stop me." The Sultan looked at her, half in awe, half in dread. He knew the wedding had not just broken laws, it had broken destiny itself. And beyond the palace walls, a storm was already rising, one that would soon devour those who dared to love too greatly. The harem glittered like a cage of jewels, but beneath its beauty venom coiled. Every smile was a blade, every glance a threat, and at the center of it all sat Hurrem Sultan dressed in gold, surrounded by enemies who waited for her to fall. But she would not fall. She would strike first. After the forbidden wedding, the empire seemed calm to calm. Hurrem could feel it in the air, the servants' eyes avoiding hers, the guards' sudden silence when she entered. Even the eunuchs whispered her name like a curse. In the shadows of the harem, Hurrem Sultan, the Sultan's former favorite and mother of his first son, watched Hurrem with burning hatred. "Let her laugh now," Mahidevran hissed to her attendants. "Soon she will be buried with that smile." Mahidevran's allies were powerful old concubines, court ministers, and even the Grand Vizier himself. To them, Hurrem was an intruder, a foreign witch who had bewitched their ruler. But Hurrem knew the truth. Power never hated beauty. It only hated a woman who used it. Every morning Hurrem sent gifts to the Sultan, poetry written in her own hand, perfumes from Damascus, embroidered shirts with secret verses sewn inside. Each gift reminded him of her touch, her voice, her presence. And slowly, she began to isolate him. One by one, she removed his oldest counselors from his side. Ibrahim Pasha, his childhood friend, began to lose the Sultan's trust. "Too proud," Hurrem whispered. "Too ambitious." The seeds of doubt took root. Meanwhile, Hurrem began to build alliances within the harem. She befriended the eunuchs, rewarded the guards, and bribed the scribes who controlled the palace's letters. She learned everything: who slept where, who loved whom, and who would betray for gold. Knowledge became her weapon. Secrets became her soldiers. One evening, Hurrem found a small silver box on her bed. Inside, a comb tipped with poison. The message was clear. She smiled faintly and called for her maid. "Tell them," she said, "the snake's teeth have missed their mark." But later that night, as she brushed her hair, tears fell silently onto the floor. She had not cried since her captivity, but this loneliness was deeper than any chain. Even in the Sultan's arms, she was surrounded by ghosts. Suleiman saw her sorrow and asked, "Why do you look at me as if I am far away?" She replied softly, "Because power always is." Weeks later, a new scandal erupted. Mahidevran, humiliated by Hurrem's growing influence, attacked her in the harem, clawing her face and tearing her veil before the other women. Hurrem did not fight back. She simply walked away, blood trickling from her cheek, dignity unbroken. When the Sultan saw her wounds, his fury burned across the palace. He summoned Mahidevran and stripped her of her rank. From that day on, Hurrem became the only woman permitted to share his chambers. The empire gasped. Hurrem had turned humiliation into power, weakness into triumph. Now she moved with calculated grace. She began writing letters to foreign rulers, the Polish king, the Shah of Persia, even the Vatican itself, not as a concubine but as the Sultan's consort. Each letter carried her seal, her wit, her ambition. Historians would later find these letters, calling them the serpent's ink, but within those lines lay her genius. Hurrem was turning love into diplomacy and diplomacy into control. One night, as she watched the Sultan sleep, Hurrem whispered, "They call me the serpent in silk. So be it. A serpent survives where lions fall." In the darkness, she smiled, because she knew her next strike would not be in the harem. It would be in the council chamber, and this time her enemy would not be a woman. It would be a man who once called himself the Sultan's brother. A storm gathered over Istanbul, swallowing the call to prayer. From the high tower of Topkapi Palace, the Sultan watched the lightning strike across the Bosphorus. Beside him stood Hurrem Sultan, radiant, dangerous, and below them, the empire's most loyal servant prepared to die, without knowing she was the one who had sealed his fate. For years, Ibrahim Pasha, the Grand Vizier, had been more than a minister. He had been a brother to the Sultan. They had fought together, ruled together, shared victories and tears. But lately, the Sultan's gaze had grown cold. Each time Ibrahim entered the council hall, he could feel eyes burning through him, the eyes of Hurrem. It began with small things. A rumor here, a missing report there, a letter from a foreign envoy accidentally found in Ibrahim's chambers. Hurrem played her game in silence. She fed the Sultan's doubts like poison in honey. He loves his power too much, she whispered one night. He thinks himself your equal. Suleiman said nothing, but his silence was an omen. At a royal banquet, Hurrem entered wearing silver, the color of death in Ottoman superstition. Across the hall, Ibrahim raised his goblet, his smile polite but brittle. When their eyes met, she smiled faintly. That night, a servant slipped into Ibrahim's study with trembling hands and laid a letter on his desk. It bore the Sultan's seal. The message was short: meet me alone at dawn. The empire demands your explanation. Ibrahim's breath caught. He looked out the window at the palace lights flickering in the distance, unaware that this would be the last night he would ever see them. As the palace slept, Hurrem knelt by her window, whispering prayers into the darkness. Her hands shook, though she had long mastered the art of stillness. She knew what would happen at dawn. She had whispered it into being. When the Sultan came to her chamber, his face was unreadable. Was he truly disloyal? He asked. Hurrem met his gaze. He was loyal to you, she said softly, but not to your crown. The words were her final blade, elegant, silent, deadly. At dawn, Ibrahim was summoned to the Sultan's private room. He entered dressed in white, the color of peace. There were no guards, only the Sultan and the soft sound of rain. Brother Suleiman said, "My Sultan," Ibrahim replied. Then the doors closed, and history fell silent. When the doors opened again, Ibrahim's lifeless body was carried out wrapped in silk. His head bowed, his eyes closed, as if in prayer. The empire trembled. The people wept. The great vizier was dead, executed on the Sultan's personal order. From her balcony, Hurrem watched the funeral procession. Her lips did not move, but her heart whispered, "Forgive me." She had killed a man she had admired, but this was the price of survival. In the palace, love was not a gift. It was a weapon sharpened by fear. For days, Suleiman spoke to no one. He walked the marble corridors like a ghost, his footsteps echoing through the halls where laughter once lived. Hurrem waited, knowing grief could turn either into hate or dependence. Finally, one night he entered her chamber. His face was pale, his eyes hollow. "Do you think God will forgive me?" he asked. Hurrem touched his hand gently. "God forgives kings," she whispered, "but history never does." He kissed her hand, and in that moment, his soul surrendered completely to her. The man who ruled an empire was now ruled by the woman who had remade it. Outside, thunder cracked over the city again. Hurrem looked toward the storm and murmured, "Lightning cleanses the sky, but it always leaves the air heavy with death." The empire had lost its most trusted voice, and now, with no one left to oppose her, Hurrem's shadow would stretch beyond the palace into the empire's very heart. The palace bells tolled like mourning hearts. In the quiet of Topkapi's marble halls, the scent of incense hung heavy, a fragrance meant to please both God and ghosts. Hurrem Sultan sat before a mirror that no longer flattered her, watching her reflection fade like the dying light of a candle. Outside, the empire she had conquered without a sword trembled beneath the weight of her legacy. Years had passed since the night Ibrahim Pasha's body was carried through those gates. The Sultan had aged into silence, his victories fewer, his sorrows many. And Hurrem, once the blazing fire of the harem, had become its cold moon. Her sons were grown now, princes divided by ambition. Each one whispered of thrones and crowns, and each one carried her blood and her curse. Hurrem had given the Sultan heirs, but also enemies born from the same womb. At night, she dreamt of chains. Not the iron ones she had worn as a slave, but the invisible chains of destiny, each link forged by her own choices. She had freed herself from captivity, only to imprison the world around her. One evening, the Sultan visited her chambers. He was older, slower, yet his eyes still carried that ancient storm. They sat across from one another, surrounded by silence thicker than memory. "Do you ever miss who we were?" she asked softly. Suleiman smiled faintly. "We were never who we thought we were." She lowered her gaze. "Then who are we now?" He looked toward the open window, where the wind carried the call to prayer over the Bosporus. "History," he said, "and history is cruel." Hurrem's eyes glistened, but she did not cry. Queens were not allowed. Tears, only regrets. Soon, Illness crept into her body like an uninvited guest. Her hands, once steady enough to hold the Sultan's heart, trembled with weakness. Doctors came with their prayers and potions, but Hurrem knew what no one dared to say aloud, that even queens cannot bargain with time. She summoned her son Selim, the one she believed destiny favored. "Rule wisely," she told him, "but never gently. The throne does not forgive the merciful." Selim bowed, but behind his obedience was the shadow of fear. He knew his mother's crown was made of ghosts, and soon he would inherit them all. Asterisk as the muezzin's call echoed through the palace one last time, Hurrem asked for solitude. Candles surrounded her like sentinels of light and flame. She held a single rose, dried and fragile, the same flower Suleiman had once placed in her hair the night of their forbidden wedding. She whispered to it, her voice barely a breath. "I was your slave, Ben your queen, and now only your memory." Outside, thunder rolled over Istanbul, a storm echoing her first night in the palace, and as the wind swept through her chamber, the candle flames bent low, as if bowing to her spirit. When dawn came, the palace was silent. Hurrem Sultan, Roxolana, the captive who ruled an empire, was gone. Asterisk, they found Suleiman standing beside her lifeless body. He touched her hand gently, tracing the lines of her palm as if searching for the fate that had brought them both to ruin and glory. "She changed the world," he whispered, "and I changed for her." He ordered her burial beside his future tomb, a privilege no woman before her had been granted, for in death, as in life, Hurrem would never be forgotten. Asterisk, years later, when Suleiman himself was laid to rest beside her, the empire still whispered her name. Some called her a witch, some a saint, but all agreed she was power itself, cloaked in silken sorrow. The harem women told tales of her beauty. The viziers cursed her cunning, and the poets wrote that even God had paused to watch her rise. From a Ukrainian slave girl to the most feared woman in Ottoman history, Hurrem Sultan had written her story not in ink but in blood, tears, and empire. And though centuries would pass, her shadow would remain etched into the heart of Istanbul, in every whisper that says, "Power does not belong to kings. It belongs to those who dare to love like gods and sin like humans."